Welcome to the Very Liberal podcast with me, Lembit,
And me, Mark Oaten.
where we go through the stories of the day from a liberal perspective, at least in my case, not so much with Mark, though, I'm sorry to say.
Come on, Lembit. That's an old joke. You try it every week. We know I'm more liberal than you, and this podcast will prove it. Okay?
Well,
That's the
well,
challenge.
we'll see. We'll see. Where do you want to
We'll see
start
about
then
that.
with your
I'm
great
coming
proof
out.
of your liberalism?
I'm on fire this morning. Come on, let's do it. And I want to cover lots today. I want to cover what Keir Starmer's saying. He's downgrading expectations. I want to talk a little bit about that Kamala Harris laugh and how she's managed to get rid of it. I want to talk a bit about prisoners' release as well. This is one of the controversial things. What about you? What's on your mind?
Oasis was getting. I saw a news story recently. Oasis has got back together. Who would we bring back from the past? Would be one. Another one for me. Well, two others actually. One's house prices. I'm a homeowner. I like that, but it might not be good for the country. And up Pompeii. You've just got back from a trip. You must have some good stories, Marco Polo.
I absolutely do. Although some of them are a little bit X-rated. I'm amazed how racy Pompeii was. So we may leave that for after the threshold. Okay.
How long is the program going to be? Okay, let's start with something else which people may find offensive. Keir Starmer, what's on your mind, Mark,
Well, look,
about that?
he's making this big speech saying things are going to get worse before they're going to get better. I mean, it's incredible. If you think about when Tony Blair came in, things are going to get better. There was no, it's going to get worse before. This is classic Keir Starmer stuff. He was so cautious during the election campaign, and it appears that he now wants to carry on with this very cautious, not over-promising. Some people might argue it's refreshing to have a politician being fairly upfront. Others might say it's demoralizing and it lacks any kind of vision and aspiration for the country.
Well, you're sitting on the fence here, typical liberal. Some would say, I'll put my cards on the table here. This is terrible. From a marketing point of view, it couldn't be any worse. Only 18% of the eligible electorate voted for him in the first place. And now he's telling the other 82%, actually, you were right not to vote for me because I can't improve. I saw Ellie Reeves, the chair of the Labour Party, who incidentally is sister to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, so no coincidence in terms of surnames there, answering questions on one of the mainstream media when asked, well, what's going to get worse? And all you could say is, what's going to get better? We're dealing with clowns. We're dealing with children. We're dealing with people who have no idea how to run a country. I didn't want to hear this. And frankly, as one of the shareholders in this country, I would say to Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, and all the rest of them, you're on probation. And if one more slip up, you're out.
I think the idea that, I mean, he's talking about the fact that things won't get better until after the next general election. Now, look, we know it took 14 years. We've heard it over and over again, 14 years for Conservatives. Of course, there's things that need to be put right, but you need to have ambition. You need to have vision. You need to excite the electorate. You need to give some hope. We've had such a miserable time from our politicians over the last 2 or 3 years. It's time to start engaging. And actually, if you talk in this negative way, then guess what happens? People feel negative, and they're going to feel negative about his government. And the honeymoon period, this is almost over. I think the biggest issue they're going to face, though, is time and time again, the Tories said, you're going to put taxes up. Time and time again, Labour said, no, we're not. It now looks like they're preparing the ground for tax increases. That will be one of the biggest lies in electoral history if they do that.
Yeah, well, we've gone from shotgun wedding to eager divorce in 6 weeks. It's ridiculous. He wasn't popular when he got elected, in my view, and he's just doing everything he can to prove people like me, who didn't really respect Starmer's intellectual and professional capabilities in the first place, absolutely right. Take an example. Prisoner releases. I don't know where you stand on this, but
I mean, look, we disagree slightly, I think, on prison policy, because I'm not a great believer in putting people in prison anyway in the first place, unless they are serious offenders, because I know what happens in prison. It just turns out more reoffending. It's a vicious cycle. But let's set that argument aside. The one thing I do think he got right, actually, was the whole response to the riots. I disagree with you there. I think it was important to send a very quick, tough signal. And look what happened. He did send a lot of people to jail very quickly, within 48 hours, and the riots stopped. So on that issue, actually, that quick, tough action appeared to stop the riots from developing and getting out of control. I think he got that one right.
Let's get a curfew then. Let's have a curfew around the whole country. That would reduce some trouble. Let's ban all alcohol. This is the problem with people like you who pretend to be liberals. No offense. The difficulty here is you think by oppressing people's opportunity to do things that you may not like, you oppress their mindset.
I'll give you this, Lembit, that the underlying cause behind those riots needs to be addressed politically. And that hasn't happened yet. And the Labour Party needs to get into that issue. And sadly, that issue is around immigration. And we need an honest, frank discussion about that. However, on the narrow issue of bringing back security and safety to our streets, which were getting out of control, they got a grip of it really quickly. And I think on that issue, Starmer acted efficiently. Has he stopped the underlying issue? No, he hasn't. That's still, I'm sure, bubbling away and needs to be addressed at some point pretty damn soon.
I don't give them credit for oppressing angry, ordinary people and putting folks who've never had even a tussle with the police in prison in kangaroo courts when that idiot, what's he called, then Labour councillor Ricky Jones says, let's slash the throats of the protesters and get rid of all of them. He hasn't even, at this time, while we're talking, he hasn't even been tried yet. Total double standards, total lack of respect for the public, and total lack of respect for the fact that we are the shareholders of this government. And as far as I'm concerned, they're doing this without my consent.
Lembit, look, we've discussed this before in the past. We fundamentally disagree on this issue. I don't like prison sentences, and I think it's arguable that the way the quick sentences were done and the length of them is slightly troubling at one level in terms of natural justice. But in terms of being able to quickly stop those riots, it was extremely effective. Let me talk about my prison issue, because this is the classic one where actually it probably will take 10 years to fix this problem. There are no quick fixes at all on this issue. What I want to see happen is building new education rehabilitation centres. So I would imagine a good third of people that go to prison should actually be going to these centres, learning to read and write, learning to get skills to train, learning to be able to go out back into society and do something purposeful rather than reoffending again. Now, nobody wants to hear that, because it's a lot nicer to hear lock them up, throw away the key. It sounds nandy-pandy to say actually educate them. I would argue that is the tough liberal thing to do, is to spend more resources training, educating these individuals so they don't commit a crime again. That, however, is going to take years for the policy to seem to reap rewards.
I'm going to surprise you now, Mark. I agree.
Yes, you are a liberal.
I know this seems like a volte face now, if I'm allowed to use French language in Britain.
That
maybe
was something you served around at dinner parties.
That just shows how hoi polloi you've become in the last decade. When I was a member of parliament, I was working actively with the prison in Shrewsbury, which was near my constituency, to create a kind of civilized chain gang to get the canal going again, on the basis that it got the prisoners out, gave them skills, and gave them an incentive. I agree. What I'm disagreeing with is this random way that they try to get serious offenders out and put trivial offenders in. If you can even call someone who makes a stupid comment on a social network an offender. A year for that in prison? Really?
There is a really interesting lesson I've taken from New York years ago. I went out there to meet, at the time, the mayor of New York, Giuliani, who had a zero tolerance policy. It was fascinating. If somebody committed a small crime, if somebody graffitied a shop window, within 24 hours, that shop window was replaced, and they had a very, very tough stance. It was called zero tolerance. It actually was extremely effective in clearing up crime, tackling problems, petty thieves. It solved that problem in New York. And I wonder whether the policing that we have in this country needs to focus more on the small issues, because if you are tough and quick and act on those small issues, you may stop them aggravating into bigger issues. I agree with you. It seems that if you call the police about something like that, they haven't got the time. They're only interested in the big stuff. My argument is be tough on the small stuff and it doesn't become big in the future.
That is one of the unanswered questions for me, and you partly answered it. What did Giuliani, a very controversial character, of course, in American politics, do right? Because a lot of people who I know in New York say that his zero tolerance worked. Probably come back to that another time. Now you've mentioned America, though. What do you make of Kamala Harris, who, according to the mainstream media, which is always an amber warning light for me, is doing quite well in the polls?
I mean, you've talked before about her silly laugh, for
Yeah.
example. Yeah, well, that's
That's an
very
artist
worryingly.
impression.
What did you have for breakfast this morning? Or I don't know,
Um,
what trousers are you wearing?
um,
That was very high, Lembit, I have to say. Very, 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 very high.
I'm just angry. I'm just angry today. That's all it is, Mark.
You're grumpy this morning. You really are. Look, you've talked before about the fact that as a figure, she doesn't look too serious. Absolutely fascinating is that what we're told is she's been trained on how to laugh normally, to get rid of that silly laugh. And actually, I thought the whole convention was superb. It was outstanding. They had one big hit star after the other. I mean, they were able to bring out Bill Clinton, Michelle Obama, Barack Obama, the new VP, and then she came along and gave her speech as well. Probably the least impressive of all of the speeches they had during the week, but it was her most statesmanlike one as well. I think this was a great convention. I think they've got a bounce. In many ways, by having her selected so close to the election, they can make more use of the bounce than if actually she'd been selected 2 years ago.
Except for one thing. Elon Musk, who gave, let's face it, a fairly easy ride to Donald Trump in his impromptu interview on X, where ironically the tech was problematic. He did this informal poll. Millions of people responded, and in his, he says it himself, non-scientific sample, 72% said they were voting for Trump and 28% for Harris. I didn't see any serious policy content in the speech you're referring to with Kamala. And it seems to be, as one of my friends says, a basement mentality. Just keep her in the basement, keep her quiet, and hope that she goes in without people realizing that she's not particularly bright and she's certainly not strategic.
I mean, what's interesting between the conversation we just had about Starmer and Labour, there we were talking about different policies and things that they may or may not do. With this convention and with the Republican convention, it's nothing. There's no mention of policy of what they're going to do. It is purely showmanship. It's razzmatazz. Individuals are judged on how well they perform, on which pop stars they're able to get to appear at their convention. They're not actually judged on what they're going to do for the country. And I don't think that as we run up to November the 5th, we're going to be enlightened anyway, because this is, after all, a presidential campaign. Therefore, self-evidently, it is about the individuals and their personalities and not about the policies that the two individual parties stand for.
I think you're making an assumption there that the public were wowed by the celebrities, and yet they scored an own goal because the inference was Beyonce was going to turn up, maybe Taylor Swift. Neither showed, and that overshadowed some of the coverage for the people that did. Far from thinking more of Kamala Harris, I actually think less of the celebrities that were endorsing her, to be honest with you. Do you think
they should have got in, of course, is Oasis? I mean, that would have set people. We've now got the announcement that the two brothers have finally put aside this feud. Liam has, I think, been the one who's been driving this. Noel seems to have appeared to come out and accepted it. I mean, personally, I couldn't give a damn. I'm not a big fan of either of them. I didn't particularly like their music. However, as a massive story for the pop world next year, this is going to be huge. It is probably, after a Beatles comeback, the biggest comeback that people have been waiting for. But it gets you thinking, what other comebacks, what other horrible arguments and rivalries that people have had. It does show that they can come together.
Yes, and 400 million bucks might have something to do with it as
They need
well.
the money. They don't need the money.
Well, some people, if you're used to having millions, maybe you do. I mean, I've unlike you, I've never really had millions, but if somebody said to me,
these are fake Hockneys behind me, okay, just to set the record straight, Len, but they're not real Hockneys. Okay?
I can't even afford fake Hockneys. I would go onto a stage with you, quite happily if someone's going to give me 400 million pounds for it. I would do that. I would do that. But
But we're
maybe
doing
you can
this, we're doing this for nothing. So, and remember, any sponsorship is still welcome. We keep asking each week, but we would welcome a bit of sponsorship.
Specsavers. Maybe I'll
Yeah,
wear my glasses. I mean, I do go to Specsavers. You never guess who I bumped into Specsavers yesterday.
this is a bad joke, isn't it?
Yeah. You never guess who I bumped into in Specsavers yesterday.
Who did you bump into at Specsavers yesterday?
Everybody. Moving swiftly on.
That is a dad joke. That really is a bad dad joke.
But all right, back to Oasis then. What's a Wonderwall? Tell me, what is a Wonderwall? Is it just because it rhymes with "and after all"? Is that what happened there?
I was more Park Life, I think, and Blur, but it was this huge thing. But I tell you what was interesting about it. It was when there was some optimism around in the UK. We talk again about Starmer, and then the comparisons to Blair. The Blair things can only get better. The whole Blair Britpop. This was part of an enthusiasm where we were celebrating being the best in the world for our music and culture. And so, in a way, the Oasis revival is a memory of those times when things did feel positive. We were proud to be British.
Who would you bring back then as missing duos in any walk of life from any era?
If we're thinking politics, and we've just been talking about American politics, I actually really like Reagan Thatcher. I thought that was a golden time, that the two of them working together. I mean, controversial, but it seemed to be a genuinely brilliant partnership of minds. And then when they brought in the third figure of Gorbachev, I mean, that was real fascinating politics of the highest level. And you got a sense in which you had world leaders who were changing absolutely the way the world was formatted. Thatcher and Reaganism, Thatcherism, and then Gorbachev, it was huge. You don't get that same impression that would be the atmosphere with Starmer and Harris, do you? These were big beasts. So if you ask me for a political combination that was great, I would say Thatcher Reagan. What about you, Lembit? Apart from us two, of course.
Apart from what?
Us two, Oaten and Opik.
That's what I thought you said. Yeah. Okay. I'll leave that for the viewer. I would go right back to Nikita Khrushchev and John F. Kennedy, who nearly caused a nuclear war, but then averted one. That was the original beginning, I think, of disarmament. But from my own and your historical experience, the most optimistic time for me was just after Tony Blair got elected. We were Liberal Democrats, but it was an optimistic time because Blair and Clinton, they were a good team. They felt good, whatever their internal foibles and however they both fell from grace. There was a time you thought, actually, the world's a bit of a better place. And Gorby was playing in that game as well. But when you compare the ones you said, Reagan, Thatcher, Khrushchev, Kennedy, Clinton, Blair, we've got Starmer and potentially Harris. It's like Abbott and Costello. It's like Laurel and Hardy, except they meant to be funny. I'm not very optimistic, Mark.
I mean, I wonder whether it's because we're getting older now that the big beasts of politics just seem to us to be better in the past. But I'm not sure it is that. I think genuinely, if you look at history, people will say these were figures of huge importance politically, and we don't seem to have that now with today's era. You want to talk about house prices, Brit? You're busy buying and selling houses at the moment, I think, Lembit.
I don't ever discuss my business. I'm busy selling everything at the moment. Thanks to this, because I've been told things are going to get worse. I got to sell everything. Live my life. But having said that, go on.
I'm selling a flat in London, and I have to say my frustration. I started selling it in January, and the legal process. What are we now? September almost. The legal process, the drawn-out arguments is still carrying on. And I think there was a survey a couple of weeks ago which said that this country is the longest in terms of the whole process from actually putting a house up for sale and it completing. It is ridiculous. The solicitors have a go, the estate agents have a go, the banks take for ages. The good news, however, if you're a house owner, is that the figures coming out this week show that house prices are finally turning the corner and going up. Does that mean that rents will go up? Does that mean it's harder for people to get onto the housing ladder in the first place? Probably yes. So it's one of those things which is good news if you're on the ladder, bad news if you're trying to get onto that first rung.
It's good news if you're on the ladder or you have nice parents who are on the ladder. Terrible news if you come from a rentnik history and you actually wanted to own. But maybe we're the fools, Mark, because you can't take your mortgage with you when you go. We're mortgage slaves. And
Yeah,
maybe the smart money is on renting and being free.
maybe. On the other hand, these days they'll let you have a mortgage right up until you're 75, in some cases up to 80. So you will be taking the mortgage with you to your death, or worse still, you'll be passing it on as part of your will. As the family gather around looking to see what they're going to inherit, they're going to be inheriting your mortgage in the future.
Yeah.
Who
Well, it reminds me, incidentally, the oldest man in the world's meant to be 112 years old. I wonder if he's paid his mortgage off.
Well, it's still be being chased for those final payments. That gives me hope. I mean,
Yeah, chased for his final payments. Very good.
I've still got I've still got on that basis quite a few more years left in me then. But I tell you what I did just do, which showed me what age is all about. I spent a few days in the Amalfi Coast, went to Pompeii. I went as a child and I was bored silly. This time I went as an adult. Wow, it was absolutely incredible. I mean, the things that they were able to do back in the day. They invented cat's eyes. They invented pedestrian crossings. They invented bars. They invented brothels. I mean, and it's still all preserved because, of course, the ash completely kept things preserved until they rediscovered it. It's fascinating. If
That,
you've not had a chance to go and see it. It's really amazing.
that must have made the people feel great as they look their insurance policy and say, "Oh, unfortunately, a lava deluge isn't covered. Sorry, kids, you're going to have to start with your own mortgage." I'm not sure it's an altogether happy story.
Well, they
But
were happy, Lembit, because they knew they were only going to live until an average age of about 32. So what did they do? They had sex and they drank and they had a good time. There were three theatres in Pompeii because all they wanted to do was have fun because they knew they were going to die really quickly. And final irony, I'm fascinated. The reason they did die young was because they drank so much. It wasn't the alcohol that poisoned them. They were drinking from lead bottles and nobody realized it was the lead that was killing them.
that's right. It's like a mate of mine who had about 10 pints. This is last year. And he told me that it was the kebab that had given him food poisoning. Right. Yeah. Well, you might believe that if you want to.
Well, a
But
mate of mine, Lembit, that sounded like a very strange mate. Are you sure that wasn't you?
it was, well, who made that ridiculous claim? William Hague claimed he could drink 13 pints. I'm not convinced that he could have absorbed 13 pints in his day, but it's good
At
to know
my
that you
age,
can.
I have to keep going to the loo all the time at my age anyway, let alone if I've got 13 pints. Shall we call it a day now? We've discussed our bladders and our
Too much information. I don't know why you use this as a counseling session for yourself, but maybe that is a good time to stop. Tell us if you've been in Pompeii. How do you feel about mortgages? You can get in touch by contacting us on the link on the screen right now. I'm Lembit, and I hope to carry on having my interesting and educational debates with Mark Oaten. This is the Very Liberal Podcast.
and I'm Mark Oaten saying goodbye, and I'm off to go to the loo.
Why do you do that? Why do you do that?
Like
We'll try and raise the standard for next time. It's good night from me.
and it's good night from him.
Good night.